Hi, everybody. This is Scott. Thanks for taking the time to check out this webinar. The article that I chose was the bias against overweight job applicants. Uh, as I was looking through the list of different options that we had available, it did seem like that this overweight idea was something that that I don't usually think of when thinking of diversity leadership. It's something that it's interesting that it's been researched as much as it as much as it has, and kind of digging into that and looking at diversity leadership from a different perspective was very interesting to me. Bias and discrimination, as you know, comes in all forms. And the article starts off by just talking about how overweight job applicants may be discriminated against for jobs based on the negative stigma of being overweight. I'm sure we all know just how just how our society views people who are quote unquote normal as opposed to those with an overweight or obesity problem, and that can certainly translate into getting a job, and being considered for promotion, etc. The authors, as they were going through this, they created a simulated job interview or set of job interviews that people watched. We'll get into that in a little while, and they were focusing on a few different things: the hireability of the different candidates. How their perceived stability would be, their capacity for performance in the job, their adaptability to the job, and interpersonal skills. So these five things are sort of what the raters, the participants in the study who were college students, were supposed to follow. Obesity bias, for the purposes of this article and for our conversation, is it's used as a broad term that could encompass any combination of negative thoughts, feelings, or behaviors towards obese individuals due to their weight. Fairly standard, straightforward. Looking at people who are obese or overweight and thinking negatively of them is the obesity bias. But it's important, I think, to define that term so that we all know, what exactly we're talking about here. Obesity bias, as they said, has a unique nature. That it's, when you look at the different prejudices in the world, it's a very different, very different animal. As this says, it's one of the last socially acceptable prejudices in our diversity-conscious society. There's lots of people in all spectrums that, without even thinking of it, just saying, man, I don't want to be fat. I wish I could lose some weight. I wish I could lose some weight. What's your New Year's resolution to get to the gym, to lose some weight? All of that plays into having, being overweight is bad. Being thinner and less heavy is good. And like this, this says, there's an interesting point that fat people, typically don't have the benefit of a supportive, proud, and cohesive in-group. Following up on our discussion from the last class about in-groups versus out-groups, the people who join a gym, people who are in Weight Watchers in a group, they're all there supporting each other with the goal of leaving the group, with the goal of becoming thin, with the goal of losing weight, not staying where they are. So that I thought was an interesting revelation. That even when they are within their own group of quote fat people trying to lose weight, they're ultimately trying to leave that group, which is curious to me. The article states that the components of the overweight stereotype include but are not limited to lazy, slow, lower in competence, sloppy, unlikable, and lacking in self-control. These are all things that we see a lot of times portrayed in movies, in TV shows, in literature, that fatter people have these issues. They're the lazy ones. They're the ones. They're going to take a while to do something because they're slower. Think of The Office, and I forget the woman's name, but the one who's larger, or even Stanley, the gentleman who's larger. Michael Scott's idea of they can't do this because they're heavy. Certainly comes into play. So that was, I think that's something to consider. The article did also bring up the idea of the jolly fat guy as a subset of this, which certainly could play into it as well. And my question, this isn't really one of my last questions, but I just thought of it, how can this affect an interviewer's perception? We can already see right there that, when that's the message day in and day out, and, someone overweight comes in for a job, you can definitely see how that could be an issue. The research design, I wanted to go through this real quick, just so we know. The participants of the study were from an intro-level psych class at a Midwestern university during 2002-2003. There were 751, 60% were female, 40% were male, 64% were Caucasian, 15% African American, 8% Asian, and 13% other. The vast majority of them were students, so 93% between the ages of 18 and 21. And the vast majority of them had not actually been involved in hiring people. 114 were, obviously, but the vast majority of them, 85%, had not been. As we're looking, for receptionist, data entry, receptionist highly qualified, moderately qualified, data entry highly qualified, moderately qualified. But then they voiced over the script. So the actresses, they were just there to be seen, not to be heard. There was someone else that did it to kind of put their own inflections on there. So the participants read the applicant's job description and resume, saw that they were highly qualified or moderately qualified, watched one of the 16 videos, and then rated the applicants on those categories that we spoke of before, the hireability and so on. So that was that window. It didn't really go into play. There were two exceptions. On adaptability, for the receptionist job, when the candidate was Caucasian, the average weight applicant was rated significantly higher than the overweight applicant. You can see all these other ones, they're pretty equal. For a Caucasian receptionist, they thought that they should definitely be average weight. The rest of them, kind of different. And the other one, for interpersonal skills, once again, for the Caucasian receptionist, the average weight applicant was rated much higher than the overweight applicant. These were the only two, real exceptions to this rule. It did also point that for the data entry job, the overweight applicant for the Caucasian is rated marginally higher than the average weight applicant. So this kind of goes back to the Caucasian or white bias of, someone who's overweight shouldn't be the face of the company. Someone who is average weight should be. So I thought that was, and that for these instances in particular, it has to do with their interpersonal skills. Hypothesis 5, as we saw, found only a main effect across all dependent variables, such that the African American participants provided higher applicant ratings. So African Americans, kind of viewed everybody higher than did Caucasians, once again, because they don't have as much of a stigma. And then finally, the mood predictor that they were looking at, they didn't really find any data on that. So the most important thing of this is the implications for practice. As it says, some evidence certainly exists that overweight applicants may not do as well as average weight applicants. That seems to definitely held water. There's another study, Kutcher and Bragger in 2004, that found that a highly structured interview reduced bias against obese applicants. So, if there was more structure to the interview, more structure to the process, that obese applicants frame better. So one of the implications, of course, is that as companies are hiring, they should have as structured of interviews as possible to reduce the possibility of this bias against overweight people. Another implication, once they get through the door, interviews, they're hired, there still might ultimately be this overweight bias coming for promotions, for advancement in the company, etc. So another certain implication is that training for all managers in charge of promotions as well as hiring is suggested. That people really need to, as we've talked about in this class, keep all of this at the forefront when they're looking to hire. That needs to be kept there. This also says, of course, that a section on obesity bias in any interviewer training, just to continue the diversity leadership. New implications for practice. That racial bias wasn't found in their study, but it did play a factor when it was combined with weight and job type. So even though it wasn't there in the first place, when there was a overweight Caucasian or an African American, depending on how that is, it's possible that the racial bias may also come into play and could result in illegal practices. Like this says, an overweight person may be seen as a better fit for a private job, while a thinner person may be perceived as better suited to a public job. Once again, the whole face of the company, trying to fit into society, etc. Certainly could be an issue. So, keeping aware of that as you're hiring, making sure that you're meeting all the criteria. More implication there. That's basically the implications. Basically, looking at that. So my questions are: have you seen any evidence of obesity bias in a workplace? And what form did it take? The second one: do you think there are jobs that certain levels of obesity are right or wrong for, and why do you think so? Third one: what type of training would be most effective for your workplace to combat obesity bias? And the fourth one: are there any steps that overweight individuals can take to combat obesity bias from their end? And I think the answer, lose weight, doesn't really help. I was just trying to think of if you are obese and you're going into this, is there anything you can do to combat that and to give yourself a fighting chance for the job? Thanks everyone so much for taking the time to listen to the webinar. If you have any questions, email me. I look forward to seeing the answers and the discussion on the forum. Thanks so much. Have a good one.